stranded in the middle of a colorless, grayless period that one gets in the deepest thralls of winter. Cabin fever was starting to set in. The only signs of life on the outside were the headlights of the brave drivers who dare take the roads. Well, dead roads. Nature's makeshift bridges, made up mostly of broken tree limbs, fallen trees, and down power lines, where everything and pose a greater threat to the drivers stupid enough to take them to wherever they want to go. Even more dangerous was all the black ice. By day it was present and avoidable, but by night it was deadly. It blended in perfectly in the environment, black on black on black, like a cold, heartless chameleon out there, hell-bent on sending people back to their maker. Life on the inside wasn't much better. Here, the only signs of life were the dancing candle flames on our, well, mine, home, and the slow, rhythmic sounds of my own heart beating. It was as if we were all living back in the colonial era, surviving on the light that was emanated from the candles and casting an eerie glow. There was nothing but such to keep me company. We were all in this darkest shadows, casted over by a town-wide blackout. And it had been like that for a couple of days. Perhaps as many as 2 weeks had gone by. I had lost track of time, due to the last pulse of electricity fading away and the last sense of days that I had known. For me, Princeton, one of the Princeton families, in a small town of North Brooks, seemed unreachable from the threshold of my front door. The ethereal blackness that covered the entire town was so alien. There was a mysterious, omnipresent hostility to it. I had said goodbye to my family, who, understandably, left me in charge of looking after the house while they looked for shelter that wasn't filled to capacity. As soon as they had fled into the night, I knew I was alone. Cut off from the rest of the world, there was nothing more to do than just write and read. In the deepest pits of the realm of horror, I could only lay still and fantasize of my darkest dreams, bursting through some psychic wall into reality. Whispers in the crackling flames, demons in the shadows, dancing, enticing me. That night, I had the most horrible nightmare. As dream dominated over my physical and mental will, in my dream, I saw nothing other than the decaying and rotten brought about by some worldwide disaster, some unknown apocalyptic calamity. From within the deepest dungeons inside my mind, I envisioned myself walking down the dark streets of my own town, which sat dormant and laying with the dead. Past all the blackened houses, all the storefronts empty and closed, the occasional stray cat, and all the rotten corpses that littered the streets. In my most natural calm, I sidestepped and stepped over the bodies of the people I once knew. In this world, it was only me and the dead to keep me morbid company. In a blink of flashing light and a deafening burst of sound, the dream world was brought back to light and brought back to life. I watched in awe as the dead stood up in a flurry of still, cracking, primal movement, like a butterfly flapping its wings in front of a still, stop-motion camera. Completely unaware of me, they all began to partake in an orgy of life of sorts. They lived through the dead, and in the morbid way, mocked the streets and marched in mass into oblivion and into the darkness beyond. I woke up and felt even more dead than the walking corpses I had witnessed. Plunged into a darkness deeper than my own dreams, I was suddenly, inexplicably filled with a fear, and I was paralyzed to move. Unwilling to let my eyes adjust to the darkness, I looked around, feeling so stupid that I realized that all the candles had went out when I was asleep. I got up and found the matches and was filled with a new, creeping horror at the base of my neck. Not able to shake the feeling of being watched, I hastily got into the kitchen to find the matches. Checking over my shoulder as I went, I expected to be confronted by some unspeakable terror stalking me from behind. The shadows played with my psyche, and horrifying demons formed out of the annoying shadows that mercilessly enveloped the house. The shadows reached out to me, and they spoke to me. They beckoned to me. I found the matches that would deliver me from this nightmare and keep me safe, keep me alive. I walked alone in the house and saw from the corner of my eye the shadows begin to return to the corners of which they came. Almost surrounded, my heart rate accelerated as I turned to keep the demons at bay, in turn making myself more vulnerable. The flame danced wildly, and I could do nothing other than that to keep it still. For every move I made, I run the risk of blowing out the candle. And then, I don't want to think about that. Laying on the couch in the fetal position, sometimes twitching as I hear the whispers grow louder and louder, I gave up on restraining into the beckoning calls of the living darkness within those shadows. Still continuing to increase in volume, the voices rose in a grand crescendo, nearly screaming in my ears. My head was a vice of noise and clamoring presses against my temple, ready to crush my skull at even the slightest change in level. Then, as sudden as the noises had begun, they suddenly stopped. Intrigued and relieved by the sudden peace that befell my house, I perked up my head from the cover of the pillows that I was under, and with my head up, my ears listening, an incessant ringing in my ears began to develop. The noise came at 1-second intervals. 1 Mississippi. Ring. 2 Mississippi. Ring. 3 Mississippi. Ring. My God, it's the phone! The power grids must have come back on while I was gripped in some mental breakdown. Slowly, I made my way up the stairs to the phone, growing louder and more gradual. Walking down the hall, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, as if acting like sentries against some unknown force. I passed by the rooms filled with only dusty furniture, the doors, and the unspeakable evils that seemed to be plaguing me. The demons were in my house, and there was no denying it. The thought of sharing my house with those creatures only to be tormented day in and out filled me with a deep disturbance. Despite my mental state and the sheer terror that surrounded me, I casually walked down the hall at a slow pace, not to attract any attention to myself. In front of the home's library, I stood on the threshold debating whether or not to answer the phone. I took the step in. I could almost feel the shadows caressing me. A sense of weightlessness came over me, as if I was once again plunged back into the dream. I walked towards the desk on which the phone had sat, and with my hand mere inches away from the receiver, I stood still as if waiting for something to happen. And I picked up the receiver.
Hello?
I asked. Nothing. The only sound that came out was the stagnant hum of dead air.
Hello?
I demanded, as I became more and more irate. Nothing. Then, in an explosion of sound and noise that almost made me drop the phone, the sound of static and unintelligible rambling deafened and dazed me. The static died down to a low rumble almost instantly, but the phantom caller spoke in a strange tongue which it spoke as loud as he did just mere seconds ago. From under the noise, I could hear "you and me" being repeated over and over again, just "you and me," and again "you and me." The ultimate realization hit me like a cement truck. The power wasn't back on. When I walked down the hall through the house, not a single light flashed. Random times didn't blink on the faces of any of the electronic clocks. I wanted to throw up. I felt like I had been jumped by a brick wall. The phone rang again, and I feared to pick it up. But I did so nonetheless. Nothing. Static. Tongues. I didn't bother to put the receiver back on the hook. I turned to walk out of the room, admitting defeat. No dice. The door to the library slammed shut in my face with a surreal, calm depression. I tried the door, knowing full well what was awaiting me. But to my surprise, it opened without problem. I did not want to exit that room, though. I waited for someone to come up the stairs and face me. I waited to see at the end of the hall the figure materialize and watch me. I waited to feel the icy hands of death creep around my neck. But no such thing happened. In front of me, the hall stretched in length as I began to walk what felt like miles. Suddenly came to a stop. It stretched out at the end of a black void, materializing from the collected shadows. A congeal and mass of black clots began to absorb me. In an instant, everything snapped back to where it was. And then the doors were just seconds before ajar, started violently slamming open and shut. It was louder and more violent than any 21 gun stand. From the darkness of the thresholds in the door, I could see faces, blacker still, peeking out everywhere behind the doors that were opening. Open, face, shut. And repeat, open, face, shut. The whole ordeal was like some sadistic, psychological, demanding game of whack-a-mole in my head. At last, what seemed like hours of torment, after an unbearably long diminuendo, the entire situation halted, as if someone stopped time itself. My heart was pounding and the blood was pumping as fast as possible. I jumped up to the door and quickly closed it behind me. I was not going out of this hallway, even if my life depended on it. The adrenaline was coursing through my veins and I hardly let out a peep as a figure still suddenly materialized outside of the second-story window, staring through me with eyes almost invisible to the naked eye. I watched as the being, darker than the night itself outside, backed up and repeatedly rammed into the window panel, trying to break through. I guess I'm leaving the hall after all. Running through the hall, constantly looking over my shoulder to see if anything was chasing after me, I quickly turned to a sharp right, descending down the stairs, placing my foot carefully but still quickly, not to fall down. That wouldn't be hard. Anyone so uncoordinated to fall down a flight of stairs surely deserved to die. At the bottom of the staircase, I was faced to more of the beings, all outside the windows. Its face and palms were pressed against the glass, which made it look like a bloated, boorish beast. Anything other than the face and hands were invisible when put against the night outside. Its eyes were as black and soulless as the skin was pale. A disgustingly wide grin revealing teeth that were rotten mixes of greens and yellows and blacks. Its short breath and shallow. I speedily turned on my right heel and sprinted down the first floor hallway, past the windows, which were all occupied by similar terrifying beasts. I stopped as I almost ran into the wall, feeling all their eyes upon me. I slowly turned to face the beasts, every single eye on me, looking at me with a primal, greedily, and ravenous hunger that chilled me down to my very marrow. Everywhere I moved, their eyes followed. Everywhere I tried to escape their gaze, it always found me. I screamed at them, and they found sadistic delight in my suffering. Their breath fogged each window as the beasts began to push harder and harder against the glass. Their faces, their fists and palms hammering against the glass and drooling, they began to rant and chant upon my demise. Drowned in this noise and the sheer terror, I closed my eyes, blocking my ears, and screamed. Above my shrills, I heard a hum. and a brilliant, radiant burning that I could feel through my tightly closed eyelids. I opened my eyes to see nothing but pure whiteness, and as my sight adjusted, nothing beyond the windows, and the power was back on. My nightmare was finally over. The lights are all on, and for the first time in days or weeks, the clocks told time. I sighed a long breath of relief. I relished in the light. And then with the return of the electrical light, so too did the return of my family follow suit. Not telling them of my ordeal, I walked into the living room to shut off the lights, happily appreciating the comfort of a flowing light of the television. But as the lights went off, my jaw dropped as all the demonic concursions around the window began to appear once more. I was pale, frozen by fear. My parents looked at me and then outside the window to ask, "What do you see?" There's nothing there.